The Rambam says in Perek Aleph of Hilchot Tshuva, Ketzad mitvadeh, Omer Ana Hashem Chatati Aviti Pashati Lefanecha V'asiti Kach V'kach. How does a person say vidui? He says, please Hashem, I have either done a chet or an avon or a pesha lefanecha before you. V'asiti kach v'kach, I've done this and that. V'arei nichamti uboshti b'ma'asai, and I'm embarrassed and ashamed in what I've done. I regret and I'm embarrassed in what I've done. V'la'olam ani chozel l'davar zeh, and I'm never going to do it again. Zeh ikaro shel vidui. This is the main part of vidui. This stirosh I'm going to bring up in the Rambam is something that some of you have seen with me before. A very basic stira. So what are the elements the mandatory elements for vidui? The Rambam seems to be listing them, and over here the categories become clear in Chazal. The Rambam over here is articulating purely in terms of the vidui, but the elements are, first of all, Ana Hashem. Okay, definitively, vidui is a communication. It's not a contemplation. It's not me considering by myself what I've done wrong, but it starts by saying, please God. So it has to be a turning towards God and a communication with God. Chatati aviti pashati. It has to categorize, define the category of the chet, whether it was a chet or an avon or a pesha. Was it accidental? Was it deliberate? Or was it rebellious? Okay, and you have to say which one of those three it was. V'asiti kach v'kach. It requires perut hachet. You have to specify what it was that you did. Okay. It's not enough just to say generally, but you have to say exactly what you did. Harei nichamti uboshti b'masai. This is what we call a charata al havar. There has to be regret for the past. V'lo'olam ani chozer l'davar zeh. I'm never going to do it again. That's what we call kabbalah la'atid, an acceptance for the future. Okay, so those are the requirements for vidui. It has to be a communication. It has to speak about the type of sin it was. It has to specify the sin itself. It has to incorporate regret for the past, and it has to incorporate a commitment for the future. I'm never to do it again. And then the Rambam says, Zehu ikaro shel vidui. These are the primary elements of vidui. Okay, this is the primary vidui. So the problem is, first of all, I would say the problem is that we don't do this on Yom Kippur. I mean, certainly the formulaic vidui which we say on Yom Kippur doesn't include all of these elements. I mean, it does say chet, avon, and pesha, but it doesn't specify per sin. This was a chet, or this was an avon, or this was a pesha. There's no perut chet on any real level. I mean, we do from A to Z. We pick random words for sin and random sins that we could do from A to Z, and certainly not everything is to be found in there. And certainly there are many subcategories, and not to mention which, how is it possible for us to take it completely seriously when there might be things on that list that we didn't do, and we know we didn't do? How is it possible for us to take it seriously when there's perhaps things on that list that we don't even quite know what they mean, or the Mefarshim say 7 different things? So what are we to do in order that this actually fit categorically into the definition of vidui? Choose one and hope that it's the right pshat. So the truth is that the Rambam in the second parak of Hilchot Tshuva in Halacha Zayin begins for the first time talking about Yom Hakipurim, because if you recall what we learned last week from this first parak of Hilchot Tshuva, he spoke about Rosh Hashana, right? He spoke about din. He said that everybody has a din at the end of their life, and once a year there's a din on Rosh Hashanah, and that parak was coming to define din. Whereas he really arrives at Yom Kippurim only in Halacha Zayin in Perek Bet. Yom Kippurim was Zman Tshuva l'kol ha'yachid v'l'rabim. Yom Kippur is a time of tshuva for all, for the individual and for the community. V'hu kates mechila v'slicha liYisrael, and it is the pinnacle, the pinnacle in time of mechila and slicha. For now, let's just leave. I mean, how would you translate mechila as opposed to slicha? I'm not going to address that in this year. It's an interesting question. But by the way, what word is missing over there? Uketz mechila slicha ukapara l'kol Yisrael, and that word is, by the way, blatantly missing because the day is called Yom Hakipurim. And yet the Rambam doesn't say who kates mechila v'slicha. And he says the following: Lificha chayvim hakol la'asot tshuva v'lihidvadot b'Yom Hakipurim. Therefore, everybody must do tshuva and say vidui on Yom Kippurim. Okay, over here I'm going to skip to halacha chet. Havidui shenahagu bo kol Yisrael, the vidui which all Yisrael do, aval chatanu, v'gomer, etc. V'hu ikara vidui. The vidui which people do when they say, but we have sinned, that is the primary vidui. Well, wait a minute. In Halacha Aleph, first of all, the Rambam, we know that the Rambam is as meduyak as they come. Okay, the Rambam didn't say things nonchalantly. So twice he said Zoi Kasha Vidui, but one of them had all of the elements that Chazal say are required for a kosher vidui in it, and over here it just has the words of Al Anachlu Chatanu. Now we might say, oh, he's just saying in short, referencing, but we already pointed out that this is an expression of a kasha also on our nusach, on our nusach vidui, and our hanaga vidui. That our hanaga vidui that really doesn't include all of the elements that the Rambam requires, and it includes them in a formulaic way. But it's like a huge question whether we're actually doing what the Rambam says we have to do. So over here, what I think that it brings out is that sure enough there is a difference between kapara and mechila and slicha, and that when the Rambam says who kates mechila uslicha, the Yisrael leaves out the word kapara, he's doing it in a very specific manner, and he's doing it deliberately. As a matter of fact, if you go back to the first parak of Hilchot Shuvah, and those of you who are familiar with Hilchot Shuvah will remember that the primary topic of the first parak of Hilchot Shuvah is kapara. How do you achieve kapara? How do you fully atone? That level which we say that. It's not only as if it never happened, it's better. It's as if it was a schut, right? We turn the zdanot into schuyot, and it's completely cleansed. Okay? That's the first parak of Hilchot Shuvah. Whereas over here, in the second parak of Hilchot Shuvah, he seems to be talking about slicha and mechila. If we were to put this into interpersonal terms, I'm going through this part a little quickly for some of the people here. It's review, and it's also not the main nikuda that I wanted. I really want to get to the Seder Avoda of Yom Kippur, which is the heart of the Machzor. But to put it into terms between people, we know that we often do things wrong, and we come to somebody and we ask for forgiveness, and we say, "I'll never do it again." And we know that that's not likely. And certainly the person we're talking to knows it's not likely because we've been around this thing, 100 times, right? If you're talking about, let's say, especially like in a marriage where the relationship dances are well ingrained and chronic. Okay? So you come and you say you're sorry and you say you're never going to do it again, but like how many times has that been said? And so what that's really asking for is not for kapara, because kapara is not possible. In other words, for us to redefine the relationship, or for us to cast the relationship in a way that it even redefines the past as part of a growth process, which led us to a deeper place than we ever could have been at had we not gone through that process. That would require something more dramatic than what I'm seeing right now, what I'm hearing right now, what I'm saying right now. And yet, there's a significance to that expression of regret. What that expression of regret says is, like, I know, I'm now in a place where I see you as another, and I see that I have done damage, and I acknowledge that, and I regret it, and I wish I was at the place where I would never. And I say I never do it again. What I really mean is I wish I was the kind of person who would never do it again, and that can bring us to a place where somebody says, yeah, you're right. Like there's a part of you that I just can't stand, a part of you that I hate. You're an absolute jerk. But because you've acknowledged that, and because you've seen me in this moment, and I believe that it's sincere, I'm really willing to re-engage in the relationship. Okay, so that's mechila and slicha. That's not kapara. Yeah, let's call it mechila for now. So that would be the classic word for this.
One more time again. Mechila and slicha are regretting and apologizing.
No. Mechila is we both know that it's not pure, completely cleansed. We both know that this element in our relationship is still there. But I'm willing to continue. I'm willing to re-engage. In other words, the turning away which occurred because of the damage that was done, there's something that I'm willing to I'm willing to turn back. I'm willing to turn back to you. I'm willing to re-engage in a relationship.
How about if the person was whacked right at that moment because she heard so many times before with that big guitar?
Is somebody what?
The person whacked you right at that time because she had heard it so many times before.
Well, kapara is really much deeper. In other words, I mean, you realize that in the first parak, and the Rambam says that I hope I'm saying the words. I hope I'm quoting correctly. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu bears testimony that you will never do it again. And if you want to be of the Mekilim, I think it's the Lechem Mishnah, the Kesef Mishnah, who learns that doesn't mean that God will testify that you'll never do it again, but God will testify that you really mean it when you say that you really are convinced that you'll never do it again. Okay, so if like that's like a little softens it, makes it a little bit more accessible, maybe. But certainly the harsh interpretation of the Rambam would be that and not only that, I would say even a logical interpretation of the Rambam in terms of like what would really turn the Avera into a schut. It would be if I had really put it behind me, permanently. So that's now both of those levels exist. Yom Kippurim is a day which makes kapara possible. Okay, and that's something which comes out very strongly in Hilchot Tshuva. It's a day which provides the opportunity for us, and for certain chataim, only Yom Kippurim is mechaper. In other words, all of our work of tshuva, all of our vidui, etc., takes us to a certain level, and only Yom Kippurim is mechaper. Certain averot, only Yom HaMita is mechaper. Only when we die do we achieve kapara. But Yom Kippurim, as a kates, as a Yom of Kippurim, basically what the Rambam is telling us is it's a Yom of Kippurim. So this is your opportunity to achieve kapara. But what about all those things which we can't achieve kapara for?
What's slicha?
I said I'm not going to deal with the distinction between slicha and mechila in this year. But Yom Kippurim, for the purpose of what I'm saying now, slicha and mechila are both on the side of re-engagement of the relationship, a little forgiveness despite the fact that there has not been kapara. Okay, so this is my opportunity for kapara. But what about all the things that I can't achieve kapara for? Right? What about all those things that I'm not ready yet? I'm not at the level yet. I'm not capable of addressing them on that level. Are those not shayach? So the Rambam is saying Yom Kippurim ukeitz mechila and slicha liyisrael. In other words, there is the very fact that Yom Kippurim has the potential for kapara provides an opportunity for us to re-engage in the relationship on those other things as well. And this is very crucial because what this really touches upon, this gap between mechila and slicha on the one hand and kapara on the other hand, this gap touches on the essence of what Yom Kippurim addresses, and that is hashochenitam betoch tumatam, and that is the acknowledgement of the fact that we are human and we are flawed and we are tamei, we exist in a reality of tumah, and the Torah refers to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the context of the avodah of Yom Kippur as the one who dwells among them, Hashochenitam, or dwells with them, betoch tumatam, in the midst of their impurity. And it's important to recognize the fact that Yom Kippurim really addresses, if we spoke about in the Rosh Hashana Shir, the gap between the direct contact with God, which we would desire, and the distance from God within which we live, which in Rosh Hashanah we learned is the gap, the distance between Tchila ala b'machshava livrata olam b'midat hadin. Initially, HaKadosh Baruch Hu planned to create the world. It came up in God's mind to create the world in midat hadin, and Ra'ah she'eina yochola litkayem. He saw that it could not survive. right? So he was mitzaref midat harachamim. This tzeruf of midat harachamim to midat hadin is really touching upon that same gap. How is there a possibility of a shochen itam betoch tumatam? So we constantly have this picture of utopia, this picture of like what would it be like to be in Gan Eden? Man is created in Gan Eden, and man is created with no chet. And then we have the chet, and then we have the gerush, and we have the same thing. By the way, the roots of Yom Kippur are in the moment where we touch that. The one moment since Gan Eden, between Gan Eden and the end of days, which touched upon that proximity to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is Har Sinai. Where in Har Sinai we receive luchot rishonim, and we learn Michtav Elokim charut al luchot. Chazal tells us, Al tikri charut el cherut. Don't read that the writing of God was engraved in the tablets, but it brought freedom. Cherut mimalach hamavet. It brought immortality. It brought cherut from the goyim. It brought cherut from it. Really, what it was once again to touch that place of absolute. Of really midat hadin, right? That would be the cherut. That would be a complete overcoming of galut. It would be a utopian reality where everything. Ani amarti Elokim atem uvnei yon kulchem, right? I at that moment in Har Sinai, I imagined that you were all as gods and children of children of gods. Okay, so. And then we sin, and that narrative is what actually creates Yom Hakipurim, of course. Right? Yom Hakipurim is the day of the atonement on the Chet HaEgel. But it's not just this was like a big sin. Okay, really, what happens in Har Sinai is a recreation on a national level of what happens in Gan Eden. So it's really the story of Gan Eden in the inception of Am Yisrael as a nation. We go through that same story of Gan Eden, where it's right there for us, where the perfection is right there for us. It's given to us on a silver platter, and we turn away, like in the one. I mean, if like being over on Anochi, right? Without all of the apologetics which temper what happened there, but on a pshat level, being over on Anochi, if that's not like eating the fruit that we were told not to eat, then I don't know what is. You basically recreate that, and that gives and of course we go through the Mabul, where God says to Moshe, "I'm just going to wipe them out." Right? We go through the re-engagement of a new brit, which basically is the bringing down of the possibility of kapara, bringing down the possibility of a shochen itam b'toch tumatam, and depending how you learn the Seder Hadvarim in the Torah, perhaps the creation of the Mishkan as well.
And Yom Kippur was the day that Moshe brought down the second tablets, right?
Yom Kippurim is the day of the kapara on the Chet HaEgel. The Seder Hadvarim over there, so in Pashtut, it's the day of the bringing down of the second tablets, but the chronology there is very mixed up, is very convoluted, and the crucial element for this is the what are the luchot shneim? What are the luchot shneim? What does it mean to cast the possibility of engaging in a relationship with God, in the presence of God, and ultimately this is expressed in the fact that we have a mishkan, the building of a mishkan, and the unique avodah of Yom Kippurim, which we're going to talk about today. By the way, I just want to point out that cherut mimalach hamavet, cherut miyomot ha'olam, like why are those two things? Like what's with that list? Cherut mimalach hamavet, the luchot rishonim would have given us cherut from malach hamavet and cherut from the nations, from the angel of death and from the nations. Now, what is it? The proximity of that list really brings out the place where galut from Eretz Yisrael and galut from Gan Eden. Okay, galut qua galut is an existential state of being. It's not only a historical phenomenon. As a historical phenomenon, it's an expression of an existential state of being, of exile, which really is mortality, right? That's why, by the way, when somebody's mourning, we say, when a person's mourning them, we mourn them around the Churban of the Beit HaMikdash. And it's why the 17th of Tammuz is the day of the Shvirat HaLuchot and the beginning of the process of Churban, which leads to Tisha B'Av, which then leads to Yom Kippur, right? And over here, maybe I'm touching a little bit on the things which came up in the Asarat HaHarogei Malchut. In other words, the association between Churban and just the pure existence of evil. And Yom Kippur really is going down and touching the depths of the fact that we live in a world where there is evil, and how and seek to engage with transcendent perfection. And how is that possible? Is that possible? I would say the question: is that possible? So for a moment before we come to Yom Kippur and what actually happens on Yom Kippur, which I'm not going to explain. I mean, what happens on Yom Kippur is truly a mystery. Okay, but maybe we'll draw some of the contours of that mystery. But before that, just to go back and address what I call Machshevet Yisrael, Jewish Philosophy 101. I touched upon it a little bit on Rosh Hashana, but I think it's important to recognize, it's important to be aware of this, the background, this particular background in terms of one of the basic tenets of the Balei HaMachshava, and that is why is it that there's evil in the world? Okay, we spoke about this a little bit before. In other words, let's just go through the basic axiomatic structure of this process. The starting point would be that God is good, and that it's in the nature of good to bestow. Okay. Another way of saying that, it's in the nature of good to bestow good. Okay. Or it's in the nature of good to bestow life. Okay, over here I'm already speaking about how is it expressed. Miteva hatov lehitiv, and that the bestowal of life as a pure gift is actually destructive to life. Okay, because of what the Zohar calls nahama de kisufa, or lechem boshet.
So the bestowal of life
actually damages life, actually damages the ability for there to be life, because it creates dependence. Okay? And the simplest way to understand this is when I give somebody tzedakah, right? It's don't give a person a fish, teach them how to go fishing, right? And because to create dependence, when I create dependence, I'm actually taking away their life. I'm taking away their ability to be separate. Okay? I think the most useful way to articulate this, especially in terms of Yom Kippur, is in terms of the development of a child. Okay, so when a child is born, they're completely dependent, and there's no sense of separation at all. As a matter of fact, the baby has no sense at all of separation. Right? That's the baby's laying on his back with his hand. He's like, "What was that thing? Oh, there it goes again." That's like the first, and mom is just an extension of self, which, by the way, is of course how the first 9 months are spent, really as one integrated being. And then the process of coming into life is a process of ongoing separation. So that you have the 3-year-old who's like mine. That's right. It's like when you take something that's theirs, it's like the end of the world. They start to scream. Or like one of our kids, one of our kids, if you called apple juice anything other than the word that they had for apple juice, it's like the end of the world. And if you gave them a cup of apple juice anywhere other than the stool that they wanted to sit on when they drank the apple juice, end of the world. This is the process of definition of self. Right? I have a theory about why universally this is the motion for no, except for I think India or something. But why in so many cultures is like turning your head, because any parent knows that when you start giving your kids solids, right? So you fill the spoon with something they don't want, you try to stick it in their mouth. What do? And then you move the spoon, they go, and this is like the first time they assert their power because like, what are you going to do? You're going to shove it down my throat? That's really what you're going to do? So, been there. So like how does that get hardwired into their experience? Like, can you imagine the empowerment of that moment in the mind? So that like this gets associated with, like, I don't know. I want to publish a paper on it. I've never seen it anywhere else. I think it's a pretty strong theory. But this gets more and more acute and more developed until of course adolescence. When adolescence it becomes it's no longer just my playing with my independence. In adolescence, it actually becomes a life or death issue for me. For me to know that I am not my parents. Life or death, of course, on an identity level, not on a physical level. But I'm not able to and if I'm going to form an identity, then that separation is necessary, so that I will rebel. Right? And by the way, this is of course why it's most likely Gan Eden is a setup. It's a given thing. Like it's like take an adolescent, tell them we're going away for the day, Johnny, and you can do anything you want. Just don't open that drawer. Okay?
And here's the key.
Just don't open that drawer. That's not for you. That's not for you. So the snake comes along and says, "You can't eat anything." And Adam says, "What are you talking about? I can eat. Of course, I can eat anything." Or the Isha says, "Of course, we can eat anything. We just can't eat that." So that's what they said. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You can't eat what you want to eat. You can't eat anything you want to eat. You only eat what he wants you to eat. So there's no you. Of course, the Nachash, according to this Sforno, is the Yetzer Hara, which really the Yetzer Hara is that which pushes us to grow. We'll come back to that a little bit later in this year, but so there's no way, and that's why like when you're a parent of an adolescent, you would do well to like when your kids start to rebel, don't panic and don't freak out. Like the appropriate response is we're on schedule, because that's necessary. It's a flexing of identity, of muscles of identity, which are absolutely crucial for that shift and level of separation. And with that, of course, comes the first knowledge of self, Eitz Hadat, the first self-knowledge. With that also comes, and that's also, by the way, why it comes at puberty, because self-knowledge is born really when I begin to sense the other, right? Which is why, by the way, when people say bar mitzvahs should be nowadays, bar mitzvahs should be at 18, or nowadays they should be at 21, right? It's not true, because the bar mitzvah is directly connected to puberty. It's connected to the fact that my body is aroused when I'm in the presence of another person, and so now I have a physical feedback which brings to the fore my awareness of other. And absolutely has to bring with it an assumption of responsibility. Okay, which brings us, full circle. But we're going to come back to it later on to Yom Hakipurim, to Rosh Hashana and Yom Hakipurim. In other words, the place where da'at, where awareness, must have within it the possibility. What I'm saying, what I'm suggesting over here is that the creation of Ra, if on a simple level, the way the creation of Ra is understood is, I have to be able to earn it for it to be mine. So I'm put in, but that's not a sufficient. It's not a sufficient explanation, because if I have to earn it for it to be mine, I could be put into, I don't know, give me an obstacle course. I don't know. Why does it have to be? Why does the earning have to be through something which is antithetical to that which I want to become? Okay, but on the deeper level, the rebellious nature of it is the only thing which enables us to therefore say, when I choose good, I'm actually choosing good, because there's a me, because I have experienced what it means to choose otherwise.
So would you say that Ra is rooted in like the potential for differentiation?
I wouldn't say it's rooted in the potential, but I would say it's required for the potential for differentiation.
I think a strong argument on those grounds to be made for why the requirement for Inui on Yom Kippur is from that age onwards, because the point of Inui being to bring to consciousness of ultimate dependence on the divine, which is only came out of Shir with Rav Dov, but is only necessary once there's a consciousness of separateness. Otherwise, the Havamina is not there. So.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. We'll come back to that again at the end, but that's a very, very, very strong insight. Thank you. Now this cathartic breakdown, which we see in Gan Eden, which we see in Har Sinai, which we see, by the way, also in the inception of the Mishkan by Nadav and Avihu, not coincidentally. And by the way, the reason I say it can't possibly be coincidental, beyond the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu says, God told me this was going to happen, right? B'krovaya kadesh, v'pnei kol ha'am mikabed. God told me this was going to happen. I thought it was going to be me and you. But beyond that, we also see that it happens again. When David HaMelech is bringing the Aron back to Yerushalayim to reinstate it, we have the same thing with Uzzah, with Peretz be'Uzzah. And that lashon of Peretz and Pritzut, there's something which breaks out of boundaries, which is Poretz, which really is the process of becoming mature, which is the essence of David HaMelech, who's a Ben Partzi, whose one failing is in the context of Pritzut.
And perhaps there too.
Excuse me?
Perhaps there too, with Bathsheba.
Yeah. So, but its core in David's identity is to push these boundaries, and yet we see that the inception of the Mikdash, what does the inception of the Mikdash include? And in all these stages, right? There's always death. It always brings death. It always brings death. In Gan Eden, it brings death. In Har Sinai, it brings death. In the inception it brings death because it is death. Right? In other words, there's a paradox here, which is probably the deepest paradox that we deal with in the world. It's the deep. It's like the deep philosophical level of the paradox of the more surface paradox of how are we flawed in engagement with perfection. It's how do we live when we're dead? Whereas how do life and death work? Like how does this system where being connected requires me to disconnect, but then enables me the opportunity to reconnect. What are the mechanics? And I think that it really is a question of mechanics, like the mystery of Yom Kippur. And by the way, this is also the mystery of Purim, which is why Purim is Purim, and of course the Arizal, Yom Kippurim. Both of them are dealing with what are the mechanics of a world which enable me to engage in evil and yet still be involved, and yet the world still brings life, still allows for life. What's the possibility over there? And why don't we just get rid of it? Okay, so we did, evil existed. Let's just get rid of it. Let's just get rid of it. I mean, we want to get rid of it. We throw it over a cliff, right? Let's just get rid of it once and for all. Why can't we do away with it? But we know what happened when we tried to get rid of the Yetzer Hara, right? When we slaughtered the Yetzer Hara, right? They couldn't find an egg anywhere in Eretz Yisrael, right? Which again takes us back again to the Pritzut issue, to the fact that if we look at the most destructive Yetzer that we carry within us to our truly being alive, it's the Yetzer which creates life. If that's not a mystery, I don't know what is. This is the Yetzer. This is the most self-destructive element of the human psyche. If we talk about the Yetzer Hara with a capital Y, right? We're talking about the sexual drive.
You said it's the most destructive?
and it's the most destructive.
What's
How many people destroy marriages for this? How many people destroy people's lives for this? How often do people? I mean, talk about what area is there where something which is meant to be the most beautiful is the most exploited? Culturally, socially, where people, where we until this day, the most enlightened societies still have slavery and human trafficking. There's no doubt that it's the most destructive. It's the most destructive part of the human psyche, and self-destructive behavior and addictive behavior without even any substances you can separate from. Something you carry within yourself, which is almost impossible to overcome. Once succumbed to. The way Chazal put this is like Ever Katan Yesh Ba'adam. There's one little limb in the human being. Ma'achilo Ra'ev, Marivo Savea. The minute you feed it, it's starving. So I think it's very clear that it's the most destructive element, and yet it's that which creates, and the way Chazal express this, the euphemism Chazal have for the Yetzer Hara is the Se'or Shebayisa. They call it the Se'or Shebayisa. It's the yeast in the dough. Incredible. Ribono shel olam galui v'yadua lefanecha. Shiritzonenu la'asot et ritzonecha. This is one of the tefillot that Chazal give us in the context of vidui. Master of the world, it's revealed before you that our true will is to do your will. V'mana aseh. What are we going to do? Sha'se'or shebayisa me'akev. The yeast in the dough prevents us from doing it. It's the yeast in the dough. Like, what happens if you take the yeast out of the dough? The dough dies. You're not going to find an egg anywhere in Eretz Yisrael. Matzah.
Yay.
No, it's not stam matzah. Of course, matzah is without the Yetzer Hara. That's the cherut of Pesach. That's not today's shir, though.
But tune in. That's
We could just eat matzah.
By the way, this is why we could just eat matzah, but then we wouldn't find an egg anywhere in Eretz Yisrael.
Now you're going to make matzah bread.
By the way, this is also why the Torah reading on Yom Kippurim in Mincha, if I'm not mistaken, is the Parsha of Arayot.
Yeah.
We read in the Torah. We read all the prohibited sexual relationships on Yom Kippur. Like, why? Because it's the Day of Atonement, and we want to remind them, right? Because they shouldn't do this. Because these are like the worst things you could do. So it's not more than the worst things that you could do. They mamish are at the heart of the paradoxical element of human existence that Yom Kippurim is touching upon. Yeah.
So, getting rid of the Yetzer results in no finding egg in all of Eretz Yisrael. It would obviously be glib for me to just say, so couldn't we just learn to live without omelets? Because it also, beyond that, means that there's no fertility,
Right.
correct? In any of us,
Right.
including us.
Yeah, and I would say that nachon. I would say it's more, but the statement goes far beyond fertility. What it's really saying is that there's no development, there's no growth, because there's nothing. Because what feeds again our Yetzer Hara, and this is expressed in so many places. Kinat sofrim tarbeh chochma, right? The fact that Talmidei Chachamim fight in the Beis HaMedrash, right? And like, what's with that fight? They're not invested in their opinion. Their ego's not playing a role there. They just care about truth. No, no. The ego is like there's a yeast in the mix that drives them to that. Rav Daniel has spoken about this at length in many other shiurim, and I'm so ineloquent compared to him that I can't bring out the extent to which what makes life seek to reach its full expression. Like the inherent element which drives anything which is alive and exists to fully express itself. In one way or another is the Yetzer Hara. It's rooted in the hunger, right? Basically, what it would say is people weren't hungry anymore. They couldn't find egg, but they wouldn't want an omelet. They weren't hungry anymore. But if you're not hungry, there's no growth. There's no development. It's the yeast in the dough. So the way Yom Kippurim answers this, I shouldn't say that. The way Yom Kippurim addresses this, the central way Yom Kippurim addresses this, and the central way the Mishkan addresses this, just as we find in Gan Eden, and just as we find by Har Sinai, is gvulot, is boundary. The establishment of boundary. Okay? The Mishkan is defined by boundary. That actually is what is the Mishkan? The Mishkan is a series of boundaries. Right? Hazar hakarev yumat. Right? If somebody who doesn't belong, who comes close, will die, which is exactly what we're told in Har Sinai. Because if there's going to be a relationship and a connection, Dov Bear. If there's going to be a connection, if there's going to be a drive in a connection, a holding of a connection despite the gaps, then the boundaries become most crucial. And this, of course, is what comes up with Nadav and Avihu, right? It's both by Nadav and Avihu and Peretz Be'uzah. By the way, what's the Bekrovai Kadesh? It's the establishment of the boundaries through the lashing out. In other words, how do you establish that this boundary is here, right? This far, it's by that reaction. It's actually the creation of the system. It's the creation of the boundary. And by the way, if you learn Nadav and Avihu al pi Chasidus, Nadav and Avihu, it wasn't a gross violation of a boundary; it was a passionate violation of a boundary, right? It was a transcendent violation of a boundary, and that's why Moshe Rabbeinu refers them as Bikrovai, the ones who are close to me, the ones who are Kadesh. Nachon. But in the context of of the experience that it created for us, it created a sense of this is do not cross, do not pass this place. So that we have, one element is to create a microcosm of that existence on earth. Hashochen itam b'toch tumatam. In the Mishkan, it's the Kodesh Kodashim, right? The Kodesh Kodashim. Hashochen itam b'toch tumatam. How do we enable a connection in the midst of impurity? By creating boundaries, by saying there is tahara and there is tuma, and a Yisrael who is tahar can come this far, and a Kohen who is tahar can come this far. But the awesome thing which Yom Kippur reveals is that the boundaries are not definitive in terms of the fact that you can't. On the contrary, what Yom Kippur actually teaches us is bezot yavo Aharon el HaKodesh. With this avoda, there could be an entry into the Kodesh, into the place where no human being is supposed to be able to go in and live. And here's the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol goes in and he comes out alive. Now, who's the Kohen Gadol? It must be the most transcendent, holy individual of a generation who could possibly aspire to go in. Not. If you learn the Mishnayot Yuma are all talking about how this Kohen Gadol, for all we know, he's at Tzduki. And we have to keep him up all night, lest he have a Tamei dream. And we have to separate him from his wife for a week, because otherwise he might not control himself. He has to be married, I think, because of the things we discussed earlier in terms of what this is an expression of. But he has to be married to the point of, it's not that he has to be married during the like today we have this India that a shliach tzibur be married because we don't want a shliach tzibur that's dealing with